Hello and welcome to this review of my Canon typewriter keyboard. It's from an old electronic Canon typewriter system I found at the recycling center, and I hacked off the keyboard module from the rest because the whole typewriter was way too big and it didn't work anyway. It does come with a PCB and a kind of ribbon connector here, so I guess theoretically it's not impossible to get working, but it's going to be hard. Alternatively, I think someone has plans in the pipeline for a custom SMK board group buy. Maybe I'll get in on that. Anyway, I thought it'd be cool to show you this keyboard briefly. It was made by SMK for Canon, and it comes complete with a metal mounting plate, PCB, etc. There's different codes all over the PCB, including this 401 KBM 04100R, which I think is the main part number. But unfortunately, there's no date code that I can make out anywhere, partly because there's no controllers on the board either. The data processing seems to have taken place printer side rather than on the keyboard itself. I'm sure it's pretty old though, I'm guessing somewhere mid to late 80s because it has quite a few very old-fashioned touches about it. I'll be talking about some of those later on, but the first and one of the more obvious ones is the layout, which is rather non-standard. Of course, it's a typewriter keyboard, so you'd expect to see some weird stuff, but some things like this rectangular enter key weren't very common anymore in those days, particularly after the popular IBM Model M pushed the standard ISO and ANSI layouts in 1985. There's some strange legends on the keycaps, such as deck tab and frame, not really sure what that's supposed to do. Then there's rev index and relock, which I guess is relocate, but I can't really imagine what that would do. And then there's this rather mysterious star-shaped symbol here. Kind of wonder what that's all about. It even has an Apple-style delete symbol here, but there's also a backspace, so I suppose it actually does what it says on the keycap below, namely word delete. There's a whole bunch of slide switches to the left of the keyboard, with all kinds of things written next to them, but I don't really know what any of them mean, to be honest. I suppose it must be print settings of some sort, but what would Roman 1, 2, or 3 do, let alone this Roman 1 or 2? Or these Western numbers here. Return J, return A, or just return, anybody? How about XX, XX, or XXX? Yeah, I definitely feel like XXX today. This green thing in the top right hand corner here is probably a power button, and that uses a switch as well, by the way. Speaking of the switches, they're SMK second generation switches. SMK are, yes, they still exist, and they still have the same logo in fact, or at least in those days they were, a veteran mechanical keyboard switch manufacturer actually. They were at their most influential in the early 80s when they made their vintage linear switches, which were copied by just about everyone and their dog, much like Alps was copied in the 90s, and Cherry are being copied right now. The second generation is a completely different, much more modern switch design. First of all, they're much smaller, and second, they come with tactile and clicky versions. They also came with 3 different mounts: Alps mount, Cherry mount, and SMK's own inverse cross mount. Of the 3, by far the most common and well known is the blue clicky Alps mount version, which is usually referred to as the Monterey switch, because it was first reported in a Monterey K104 by Mousefan, who gave it its name. The ones in this board are the white tactile SMK mount version, which is one of the rarer types in the series. They're tactile switches, but you'd be forgiven if you thought they were clicky, because holy shit, they make a lot of noise. There's this tinny metallic sound to them that really sounds like a clicker. And I got so unsure of the tactile diagnosis that I actually decided to open one of them up to check it out. By the way, a word of warning, I would not try to open these switches up. Anyway, here's what they look like on the inside. Here's the slider and the top housing, and on the bottom there's the contacts. The contacts look a little bit like those present in simplified Alps, but they're even more delicate. One is a bent contact plate that actually looks a little bit like the contact hands in Space Invaders, and the other isn't even a contact plate at all, it's just a bent metal wire. The contacts have a little bit of dried up lubricant on them, which probably explains why second generation SMK switches are so smooth. I have seen pictures of new old stock linear switches in this series with an actual dollop of lubricant still on the front though. Anyway, it's definitely a tactile switch because here's the tactile leaf. The idea of a tactile leaf spring was stolen from Alps, who stole it from Fujitsu. And the tactile version, which can be distinguished from the clicky version because it's black rather than metal colored, and it has round retention hooks with a very sharp, almost 90-degree angle. The overall shape of the leaf is very similar to that of so-called mantis foot copper click leaves found in a whole bunch of different Alps switch clones, none of which are found to be particularly good, by the way. But these SMK leaves give a quite decent key feel, actually. It's quite tactile and makes for a pretty good typing feel, but the switches are horrendously inconsistent. The tactile feels somewhat stronger on some keys than others, and this key here is actually linear and very short travel. I think the internal contacts got smashed or crumpled up on the inside or something. The sound is way more inconsistent than that though, and it's not because of the case either, it's the sound the switches themselves make. Let me show you. I'm going to carefully press the keys in this row in such a way that there is no bottoming out. So all you'll hear is the switch action, okay? Listen to this. I could do this with the whole board, but the results are similar. Some switches are very silent, others make a sharp noise on the upstroke, and yet again others make noise both on the way down as well as up. And the placement of those keys is totally random. Moreover, they all look the same on the outside. I mean, I'd consider that an actual full-blown clicky switch, not a tactile one, and there's lots like this. Anyway, regardless of what they're actually supposed to be, they have a weird after sound effect in most cases. It sounds almost like magnetic reeds, in fact, and it's only on the upstroke here. Let me give you a demo of that. This is quite prevalent throughout the board, and you'll be able to hear that quite clearly during the typing demonstration. I guess these switches are just weird. These switches have an LED cutout in the top left-hand corner, by the way, unlike the other SMK 2nd gen switches. And you can see that some of the switches on this keyboard do actually have an LED in them. So maybe SMK used these switches specifically for keyboards that needed integrated LEDs. I guess that would explain why you don't see these switches all too often. The keycaps are thick ABS with nice white on green, originally white on grey, lettering. But like all double-shot lettering, it looks really sharp, and I'm really digging the look of the keycaps as a whole. And they're also spherical topped with the lettering in the middle, and there's no homing bumps on any of the keys, both of which are very old-fashioned. They have the SMK mount though, which is incompatible with anything else as far as I know. A shame, really. Overall, the switches aren't bad or anything, but compared to the much more consistent clicky switches they made, such as the Monterey's, which are excellent by the way, they're among my favorite switches, these feel a little bit amateur. It's like some kid tried to make a bunch of tactile switches by hand in their dad's workshop or something. They're nice to type on, but I much prefer the consistent feel and sound of the clicky switches. That's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.